You all set? Okay. Good afternoon. We had a very long but productive day of meetings. The season is off to a terrific start for us. We had reports from various committees today, starting with the Competition Committee. We spent a great deal of time talking about what we would call, I guess, early trends, reactions. We're obviously seeing some terrific competition, some exciting competition. The average margin of victory is down almost 2 points. We obviously have some trends that we're also following on the more negative side, which are penalties. Penalties are up about two penalties a game. Following that also is usually pace of game. So that's something else we keep a close eye on. That's also up about 4 minutes, I believe. And then our PAT rule, which we're very excited about. It's had a very positive impact. It's exactly what the Competition Committee focused on. It's about 94% success rate. We're also seeing that the 2-point conversion has gone up to about 53% as far as teams going for 2 points. So both of those are very positive trends that we're excited about. We also spent a great deal of time on player health and safety. Came up in a variety of the presentations and discussions today. It is the highest priority for us. We continue to make significant progress there. I think the rules changes, the changes to our policies, the changes to our protocols have all resulted in changes to our culture. And that is something that we're very pleased about. We're seeing a 35% reduction in the last 3 years in concussions alone. That is a very positive trend. We have the new medical timeout this year, which has been used twice. Both times we think protecting our players, which is something that we believe is certainly our priority. We also will continue in that area. We had a couple of reports on continuing work. One of them is UPMC, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, is having a conference in a couple of weeks talking about treatment for concussions. Some of the exciting developments that are happening in that area that they have been leading. So, and then I think there's a second conference, I believe, in early November around one of our international games with international sports organizations and governing bodies talking about some of the developments in this area, sharing best practices, sharing protocols, and that's something we think is very exciting for all of sports, not just the NFL. We also spent a fair amount of time talking about fan support and our growth. Ratings are incredibly healthy. Right now we're seeing increases, particularly on Thursday night with double-digit increases. This is in light of the fact that obviously networks continue to struggle in prime time, and we're bucking the trend. And that's something that's exciting for our fans, and I think continuing to see more fans engaging with our game. Not just on television, though. One of the report that we had was on all platforms, whether they're NFL-controlled platforms, NFL.com, NFL Mobile, NFL Network, NFL Now. All of those are up. All those are significantly up, and it's demonstrating, I think, the passion of our fans and how they're engaging with our game. We also spent a fair amount of time on international. We talked about our series of regular season games. We actually had a vote today on that, which extended our agreement to play international regular season games and expanded it also. We are going to be able to play games outside of the UK, whether it's Mexico or Germany or other markets. That's something that the committee approved a couple of weeks ago, and the ownership unanimously approved it today. The last point I guess I'd mention is Los Angeles. We spent a great deal of time this afternoon discussing the status of our 3 teams that have San Diego, St. Louis, and Oakland, the efforts in those markets to get stadiums built. I think there's a tremendous recognition in those communities that a stadium needs to get built. There are efforts ongoing in many of those communities. And then we talked about the LA projects themselves, our relocation policies and how important that is to not just the communities where these teams reside, but also our fans. And that's a high priority for us. So I think that focuses on everything other than, I just think the general attitude was very positive. there's a sense that everything we do, we can get better at, and that's what we're here for. So I'm happy to take your questions.
We have our microphones here. Sam Farmer,
Thanks, Roger. Are you encouraged that a Los Angeles solution is at hand? And could you characterize where you are in the process right now?
Well, Sam, I think obviously there are two potential solutions in Los Angeles. As you know, for several years you've been asking this question, so I think you may be more encouraged than I am in some ways on that point. But you know, I think it's very positive that we have two alternatives. We have three teams that are interested, that have been struggling to get stadiums built in their own communities for not just several years, but even decades. And that's something that, as I said before, there's a recognition that has to get resolved for the long term. I think the ownership was very thoughtful today. They expressed, obviously, a great deal of concern for the communities where these teams are playing now, wanting to continue to be there and be successful long term, but also recognizing that we need to find long-term solutions here. I think there's also interest in being back in the entertainment capital of the world. But we have to do that right, and there's a process. Our relocation policies are important. We need to make sure we follow those closely.
Ben Bowman, Boston Globe.
Hey, Roger. Ben Boland, Boston Globe. I know we're all fatigued over Deflategate, and it's been a while since anything has happened with that, but this is the first time that we've gotten to speak with you since the case was decided. I'm just curious, from your perspective, why is the NFL appealing this? Why is it important to keep the fight going instead of just letting the story end?
Well, Ben, that's your description. To our description, it's simply about our rights under our collective bargaining agreement. This isn't about any individual player, any individual incident. This is about the rights that we negotiated in 2011, the rights for us to have the authority to make sure we discipline. We talked today about some very healthy discipline numbers, where we're seeing less arrests, less violations of our personal conduct policy that have happened over the last 7 years, or 8 years, starting with our personal conduct policy in 2007, our revisions back in December, and this year there's probably about a 35% reduction. So the reality is the policies are working, and the policies aren't all discipline. Policies start with education, awareness, intervention, and then accountability. And so they're working, and so that's important to us. So protecting the integrity of the game is not something we're going to compromise.
Mark Maskey.
Over here.
Hey, Mark.
A few owners have mentioned in the last few weeks that they believe that if there are going to be changes to the player disciplinary system and your role in it, that will come through an extension of the CBA with the union. Do you agree that that's the process it will take? And if so, what do you see as the time frame of that? And then also, why pursue it in that way rather than as a single issue negotiation?
Well, I've had several discussions with Dee. We've had discussions over the last several years about this. We recognize that there are different ways of administering the discipline. We're open to that. We always have been. We've just never been able to reach an agreement on what that process is. We are not in favor of third-party arbitration for people that have had no involvement or understanding of our policies or, frankly, a stake in the future of the NFL. So we've been very clear about that. But there are other alternatives, and we've continued those discussions. There's been more discussions in the last couple of months, and I expect they'll continue. Whether they're in the context of an extension or not, I don't know, Mark. But we're not tied to that. We made improvements to our drug policies last year, which I think were significant, important. I think they were good for the game. I think they were good for the players. I think they're good for the NFL overall. So if we see an opportunity to improve it, anything, whether it's our policies or our processes, we're going to do that.
Rachel Nichols.
Roger, it's not hard to see why in 2006, when Congress passed the law against internet gambling, they didn't see a bunch of college friends playing fantasy football over the course of the season as gambling. They made an exception for that. But since then, with these daily fantasy sites coming where people make picks, and then if certain players do well, they just get a big payout, there's at least one congressman and a lot of outsiders who say, hey, that's a game of skill, but games of skill like poker or betting against the spread, that's gambling. It's more like that. The NFL seems to think otherwise. Can you explain why you don't see that as gambling and what you think in the future is for that?
Well, Rachel, the first thing we do is protect the integrity of the game, as I was just mentioning. And fantasy football, and I draw a distinction with season-long fantasy and daily fantasy, because season-long fantasy has been around for quite a while. In 2006, I'm not sure anyone knew what daily fantasy was. Well, that's my point. Right, and so things evolve, and you're right on that point. But states are the ones that make the determinations about whether something's legal or not legal. We follow the law, and we will do that. It is not, from our standpoint in the league, we have not taken any equity positions. We have allowed this to happen on advertising. There are sponsorship opportunities in the stadium, but not with our logos and marks. We're following other leagues in that case, in the sense that other leagues have taken equity positions. And we feel that a cautious approach is the right way. But we're protecting our game. And in daily fantasy, it's hard to see the influence that it could have on an outcome of a game, because your individual players are picking different players from different teams, mashing them up, if you might call it that. And it's not based on the outcome of a game, which is what our biggest concern is with sports betting. So our position continues to be that way. But we recognize some states consider it legal and some don't. We'll follow that law and make sure we do.
I also just wanted to follow up on Greg Hardy. He's returning from a suspension that involved domestic violence, and when kind of given the opportunity to be contrite yesterday, instead he came out and said he likes playing the Patriots because Tom Brady's wife is hot. He hopes he brings her hot friends to the game. That he said he selects other players for the Pro Bowl based on how hot their wives are. What do you think about a representative of the NFL talking about women that way, especially coming back from a suspension that he is coming back from? And have you even informally reached out to him or the Cowboys to talk about it?
No, I am not aware of the comments, so I can't respond to the comments because I haven't seen them. But we have high standards in the NFL, and we expect people to follow them. And as I mentioned earlier, with the statistics, I think the players are. I think the biggest news to the fact that we're seeing that is the vast majority of NFL players are outstanding young men. They do great things in their communities. I'm proud of what they do. They're good family men, and they're people that we should all be proud of. And that's what we're trying to highlight, are the people that are doing things right. There's a very, very, very small percentage of men who don't follow policies. And when they don't, they have to be held accountable. And we'll do everything we can to prevent that, to intervene, and to try to make sure that we get them to follow policies and see the way the NFL does things, the standards that we hope to uphold, and we won't compromise on that.
Gary?
Roger, right in front of you.
Thank you.
Just following up on a couple of things that Ben said regarding Deflategate. One of the questions that has come up in looking back on it is why you chose to pursue discipline so vehemently against one of the players, Tom Brady, who has been one of the faces of the league for 15 years, and also based on the result in Judge Berman's courtroom. Do you regret taking this as far as you did with him? And what was we really haven't had a chance to ask you your reaction to his ruling.
Gary, first, the first point, which is I have a lot of respect and admiration for Tom. I know him personally. And as I say, I admire him tremendously. And he's a future Hall of Fame player. But our rules apply to everybody. They apply to every single player. And every single player expects those rules to apply to everybody. Every coach does, every fan does, every partner, every team does. So our rules and the integrity of our game aren't because someone's popular or somebody's a Super Bowl champ or not. They're to be applied evenly. Our teams expect that, and that's our job. That's our responsibility. It's my job. And so, no, I don't regret that, and we will continue to uphold the integrity of the game, and we'll do that as vehemently as we can.
David Hunt, St. Louis.
Commissioner?
Yes, Dave.
First off, could you outline for us the cross-ownership proposal that was approved today for Stan Kroenke's ownership? And second, there's been some delays in the stadium planning in St. Louis. Did those worry you?
David, on the first one, it wasn't approved by the membership today. It's not a voting matter. The Finance Committee reviewed it 2 weeks ago. It's their prerogative. They informed the committee today, the committee informed the ownership today that the policy was met, that they were going to proceed with the changes, and that he's consistent with the ownership policies. And that's what he was asked to do as of June 15th. He did that. And I think the ownership was comfortable with that.
Scott Reed.
Roger, do you see this definitely going to a vote? And what happens if one of the sides, one of the teams doesn't get the 24 votes needed?
I assume you're talking about on
LA, I'm sorry,
Los
yeah,
Angeles?
yeah.
Yes, I do expect it'll go to a vote. The relocation policy is very important, subject to the full ownership vote, so it will require 24 out of 32 votes. 24 out of 32 clubs to approve it.
Roger, as you said, daily fantasy is legal, but there have been a number of ethical issues that have arisen this week in terms of the internal integrity of these companies. Do you think the NFL will take a second look at allowing the teams to have these companies advertise with the teams?
Well, listen, Dan, consumer protection and making sure that companies operate responsibly is important to us. And so, yes, that's going to be important to us. We're going to want to make sure that our fans are protected, that consumers in general are protected, and that we expect anyone that's involved in any way, whether it's as an advertiser or a sponsor or any other relationship, would do that in a responsible fashion. And I hope they will do that.
Vincent, LA Daily News.
Roger, if this does come down to a vote, or when it comes down to a vote, and I'm talking about Los Angeles, and it's a stalemate, let's say it's a stalemate, what are the means in place to rectify that? What do you see your role in a situation like that? And can you see a time where you put the three owners in a room and maybe have them talk it out, come to a solution that maybe can go to ownership to look at?
You asked a lot of hypothetical questions in there. I think the ownership was very thoughtful today. They understand the issues. They understand the relocation policies. They understand the obligation for our fans and for the communities where we operate. I have great confidence that they'll do what's in the best interest of the NFL overall. And I'm not going to speculate or deal with hypotheticals. We've been very thoughtful. We've had a committee that's been formally operating since January. They've been very active. In fact, I think we've almost exhausted them already. But they have done a terrific job. And I think the membership appreciates that. We had a meeting in August that was solely focused on Los Angeles. So our job is to make sure the ownership is fully informed and they have all the tools to make the right decision going forward.
Roger,
Yes.
given the way the Monday night game ended on a play that was officiated incorrectly, and everybody realized pretty quickly it was officiated incorrectly, do you think it might be time to reconsider replay review and perhaps consider something that Bill Belichick's been talking about for a few years, making all plays potentially reviewable?
Well, I would go to the first part, which is, I think, listen, in matter of fact, Rich McKay discussed it today. I'm not sure I can remember since 1990 when we haven't discussed instant replay extensively with the competition committee and also with the membership. It clearly is going to be reviewed again. I think there's a lot of obstacles to having every play reviewed, but there are other alternatives that can deal with these kind of issues, and we're going to have to address that. And I think we've shown that we've improved the instant replay system through the years, and we will continue to do that.
Okay, we have time for a couple more. Back to David Hahn, St. Louis.
Commissioner David Hahn from the
Yes,
Post-Dispatch. Just wondering, the stadium planning in St. Louis has slowed down a bit, been delayed a little. Does that concern you at all?
Well, I don't. The first part, I guess I would say yes. As I said to the governor back in January, it's very important for them to stay on a timetable. It's very important to have a proposal that's actionable and that brings certainty. And we've said that repeatedly. I think they've done a terrific job of doing that. But sometimes delays occur, but ultimately it's making sure that we have a proposal that meets those standards by the end of the year.
Okay, last question, Tom Pelissero, USA Today.
Hi, Roger.
How you doing?
The new ball protocols that were put in place in the offseason in terms of how the footballs are handled, one of the clauses in there was that at randomly selected games, some of the balls would be taken out at halftime, the information log, those balls taken out, and new balls be put in for the second half. What does the league hope to ascertain from the information that's recorded on the footballs in those cases? And given the amount of scrutiny over how science affects footballs, will those results ever be public?
I think the most important thing we're trying to ascertain is that the balls in play are within the regulations that were established. That's the core of the issue, is protecting the integrity of the game and making sure that the game is played within the rules. We're a game of rules, and the rules need to be followed by everyone. And the number one objective there is to make sure that those rules are being followed.
Will the information that's recorded then in the game reports be made public?
I don't know.
Okay.
As I say, the most important thing to us is making sure the rules are followed.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner.
Okay?
Go ahead.